So it's so good to be with you, and I got to just compliment all of you for sticking around to hear me. I really appreciate that. I know it sounds like a great conference. I wish I could have been here. I was in Nashville and couldn't break a commitment. Otherwise, I would have probably joined you. So welcome to, I'll call it Fort Worth. I know we're in Hearst, but the Fort Worth side of the Dallas-Fort Worth, what we call the Metroplex. I got to tell you, 9 months on the job, I am so happy to be here and get to know people in this part of the country. I think we all have maybe stereotypes in our head about what it's like to be from what we call back east, Northeast, what it's like to be from Texas. And I got to tell you, it has been a real pleasure coming down here to get to know folks. Big hearts, open to change, thinking differently maybe about how we invest in transit and rail. So I'm going to walk you through a presentation here. I'm going to try to be brief and just take a few questions if you have any. So Fort Worth is the 13th largest city in the United States. We have a system, you can go to the next slide. We have a transit system here that moves 5.8 million people a year. We're not even in the top 100 relative to ridership per capita. So while we are a big and growing metro area, adding 1 million people a year in this metroplex, our transit system is small but mighty. Right now we're about 85% recovered overall on transit, and that includes rail, on-demand services, fixed route bus. You can go to the next slide. The trends are very favorable here. Our focus here is on growth. We've got quite a bit of capital investment that's been made, TexRail being the latest. TexRail's growing at an eye-watering 74% year-over-year growth. Tremendous success. And one of the questions I got when I shared with my colleagues back east that I was coming to Texas, I heard a lot of, well, you're never going to convince them to get out of their trucks. They love trucks. They're not going to take transit. And folks here say that too. And what I find is that not to be the case. People that tried TexRail and TRE, particularly TexRail because it's our newest and shiniest rail line here, people love it and they're using it. And so I think the success of TexRail is proof that further investment here is needed and warranted. Next slide. I'm going to talk to you about the two rail lines that we operate today, and then a little bit about the future. So Trinity Railway Express opened 25 years ago to connect Dallas and Fort Worth. It first opened on the Dallas side, then connected downtown Fort Worth. In the early days of TRE, it was very, very much a commuter railroad in the traditional sense. Downtown employment in Dallas drove ridership for many years. Julia, I see in the audience. Julia helps us run TRE. And TRE was very successful for many years, but a couple things have happened. One, COVID has eroded in-office employment, so ridership is down. You can go to the next slide. You'll see that upward trend on the earlier slide is not so much the case on TRE. Until employment comes back, it's going to be a challenge. What we're seeing is a strengthening, though, of off-peak and leisure travel. So we see a lot of trips being made for entertainment, the American Airlines Arena, other events going on, also on the Fort Worth side. But COVID has been a very serious issue, and it's not one that's unique to this area. It's something that many of our, 33 commuter railroads across the country are facing. Next slide. We're in the midst of recapitalizing that asset. So TRE, right now we're constructing a new station to replace our Richland Hill station. We have a membership. I should back up and tell you that Trinity Metro is a membership organization. And the way you become a member is you give us a half penny of your sales tax, and the voters get to decide if they want to join. And one of the communities, unfortunately, a number of years ago, backed out of that relationship, and so we're relocating the station, also taking advantage of coming transit-oriented development. And that station will be online. Next slide. What's interesting about this project is that we're taking a single track segment of the rail line and we're adding a second track. So it will be a new station, but a new station with an additional 2 miles of double track and ample parking, surrounded by future residential and mixed-use development. Next slide. So the canopies are going up. We are on track for the end of this year to open that station. You can keep going. You see the second track is already in. That work was made possible by a federal build grant, a $25 million grant to add 2 miles of double track in this area and an additional mile of double track on the Dallas side. Now, at the end of these projects, we will have about 5 miles of single track remaining on a 31-mile railroad. So our vision here is to continue to advance that program to ultimately get to a minimum of a double track railroad, which really opens up opportunities for frequency, more reliable schedules, but more importantly, too, elevated speeds. One of the things we're going to be looking at, we'll talk about this in a moment, is 31 miles between 2 major metro centers, downtowns. That currently takes roughly 60 minutes to only traverse 31 miles. So there's clearly an opportunity there to improve travel time. Next slide. So I mentioned there's three pieces to that build grant. The double track segment at Trinity Lakes. We recently completed with DART the double track on the Dallas side. And then there's this new ClearPath technology, which is, I think you all probably know about Tower 55. You're railroaders, you know about that one of the busiest interchanges in the country where UP and BNSF come together. It's an at-grade 6-diamond interchange or crossing. And the idea behind ClearPath technology is to track train movements and coordinate train movements across the greater North Texas region. So as trains are coming into the region, they're being prioritized to allow them to stay in movement and not get hung up in the congestion that often occurs in the greater Fort Worth area. Next slide. One of the tremendous strengths and assets that we have here is we own our railroads. So the Tex Rail in the blue there also becomes what was formerly known as the Cotton Belt. And TRE, DART, with great foresight many decades ago, bought up these rail corridors. And that's been a tremendous advantage for us in terms of thinking about how we invest and what we do with our service. So we're pretty excited about that. But you can see the rail network here is very much intertwined with freight. And we're in ongoing and constant conversations with them about how to integrate the freight service with the passenger service. Next slide. Next. So we'll turn to Tex Rail for a moment. So this is a pretty common image of a Tex Rail train around one of the events going on in downtown Fort Worth. Well subscribed, as I mentioned. As a commuter railroad, not so much. Downtown Fort Worth is not a traditional office downtown. So we were never dependent on downtown employment for Tex Rail. What we've seen is a great response to leisure travel, and especially airport travel. DFW is now ranked the second busiest airport, and so it's no surprise that people are choosing that as a way to get there. Also, given the fact that congestion is a factor here, as well as a high cost of parking at the airport. Next slide. Trends here are better. We were on a steep growth trajectory before COVID, and now we're setting all-time records. So a few months ago, we had our best month ever on Tex Rail, and as I mentioned, 74% year-over-year growth. We expect that to continue for the foreseeable future. And those little dips up and down are February's. Those of you from this area who've lived through February's here, they're not like winters that I'm familiar with. It's really ice. I can't explain it. I thought, my first instinct here with the first storm was, well, do what we do back east, which is we're just gonna get out there. We're gonna, salt. We're gonna just push through it. And what I didn't realize is that everything shuts down and people don't go anywhere. So it's not a matter of having transit, it's just people don't leave their homes. And for good reason, there's no ability to get traction on the roads. I'm probably telling you something you already know. It's an observation that in my first winter here that, so that's why we have the periodic February dips in ridership. Next slide. Most exciting thing happening right now in the most immediate term is we're extending TexRail. So we had a full funding grant agreement, and we're able to deliver the initial TexRail program, $80 million under budget. We're repurposing those funds with the help of FTA to extend TexRail 2 miles to the medical district. Why is that important? Well, the medical district has 50,000 jobs within in a walking distance of this future station. So enormous ridership opportunity here for us. It also will be anchored by substantial infill development around the new station. And it really takes us, what is already a high-performing rail service will really amplify that ridership, we think. Next slide. So Baylor Scott & White is working with us to make land available. We're initially going to start out with some surface parking, but quickly move into TOD development. Next slide. So the preliminary engineering NEPA are completed. We're moving into final design at this point. Construction will begin in about a year to 18 months, and then we expect revenue service to start late 2026. A very substantial commitment. We're fortunate, my predecessor and the team before me, very efficient with the resources that we had, and really some smart and careful leadership there has allowed us to do this project. Next slide. So what's for the future of, and this is where it gets interesting, what does the future hold for rail in North Texas? And first and foremost, and I'm not going to speak about it, but I'll just highlight that DART has an ongoing project called the Silver Line. And I don't know, is anyone from DART here? Okay. Well, DART's advancing that project. It's effectively a close cousin to TexRail. So Stadler equipment, using the Cotton Belt line, similar design characteristics, station spacing. Those two lines, the TexRail and the Silver Line, will both come into the north end of the airport. So we're talking with DART right now about maybe experimenting with through running service. So do we take a train from Fort Worth and run it all the way to Plano? We're also looking at additional extensions of TexRail. So right now we are not funded to do any additional extensions, but there is the possibility of taking TexRail south into southern Tarrant County. That was the original, that's the Fort Worth and Western alignment. So there's that possibility. And of course, I mentioned TRE. There's a real opportunity there to relaunch TRE in a meaningful way. So I talked about recapitalization, really rebuilding TRE from the ground up for higher operating speeds, modern equipment, possibly going with DMU technology or the like. And getting those operating speeds. So Peter mentioned the Hartford line, a really great example of a line that was underinvested, single track railroad, maximum speeds of 70 or 80 miles an hour, that was upgraded, double track, full double tracking, 110 mile an hour service. You can really accomplish quite a bit with a relatively modest amount of investment. So I think there's real opportunity there. And then, we're looking at additional TexRail vehicles. We're running higher frequencies than we anticipated, so we're looking at buying more trains to run more service. And the question I get asked quite frequently in North Texas is, well, geez, you've got DART, you've got Denton County Transit Authority, you've got Trinity Metro, why aren't you all working together? And the answer to that is we are. We're working very closely. We have even talked about, well, what if we created a rail authority to interconnect these lines and run them and coordinate them as one railroad? And I'm open to that. I'm not, I think there are a lot of questions to be answered. First and foremost is how are we capitalizing and funding this asset, right? We can talk about ownership and organizational structures, but we need to have the resources then to do the job. So that's a conversation. That's not a quick conversation. That's not something that will happen in the next couple of years, but it's it's a thought, and as the region grows, there may be a need to have that kind of focus, a regional focus, especially as we talk about rail extensions out beyond the current boundaries of the Metroplex. Of course, so many others, and I could talk for a long time, but I want to take questions. The one final thing, too, is that we are a host railroad to Amtrak. So Amtrak service operates over the TRE, and we are open to further conversations about how to coordinate and cooperate with Amtrak. We would love to see more Amtrak service, and incidentally, my original home in New Jersey would be connected by this new train through Meridian to my new home in Fort Worth. So I get to go visit family. It's sort of connecting my two homes. So I think that's pretty cool. And with that, I'll just conclude by saying thank you. Thank you for listening. I don't know if we have time here. It looks like 18 minutes. So if anyone's got questions, I'll take them. Yes.
We'll bring a microphone around to you, so please wait. I think Josh has a fellow. Yeah. Remember, all these videos will be going online probably in about a week or two, so we want to be able to hear your questions too.
A quick question about safety on TRE, because I see more deaths just not too long ago. What are your plans and thoughts about dealing with these issues, and in light of what we've already seen in the way of presentations about suicide and trespassing? How about your situation and your thinking?
That's a great question, top of mind for us and for me personally, and that's the safety culture. My observation is that we have some work to do on safety culture in terms of getting sort of a more proactive attitude around safety. So we're bringing in a safety auditor to help us with that. We'll, actually, if any of you are interested in the private side, look for an upcoming RFP to that effect. Our chief system safety officer is going to be looking for support. Trinity Metro is a lean organization. I came from New Jersey Transit originally. We had a safety department of probably a dozen people that really got into after-action assessments, regulatory compliance. Here, I have a single team member. So we definitely need the help. As to trespassing, it's a reality on railroads, but going after those high-frequency trespassing locations and making sure that we're closing up easy access points. Also, being data-driven about it, so not just reactionary to the latest incident, and we have 25 grade crossings on the line. So grade crossings are always a challenge in our business. I'd like to see some of them closed. There's some particularly problematic crossings with bad geometry, sight lines. If we want to elevate speeds, I'd love to get to 125 maybe, like Brightline, but that's going to require grade crossing closures. So. Thanks for the question.
So you mentioned rail to airport as a very viable source of income for you. In Houston, we have four cruise lines going in, but no rail service from the airports to the cruise line. Can you talk a little bit about the politics and how to get the communities involved in funding and the vision of the multimodal world for rail?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. It's been really my core focus since I've been here, which is relationship building. I think I've spent most of my time sitting down with people to hear their thoughts and attitudes around, extending and improving access to rail. It polls very highly here. There's been some polling done by the Fort Worth Real Estate Council. A question was put to a diverse group of residents from lots of backgrounds and perspectives, and 78% of them were in favor of additional investment in rail, which is staggering to get that kind of response. With the acknowledgement in that question that they were going to have to pay to, in other words, it wasn't just should someone else pay to invest. They were willing to put their tax dollars to work on rail. I think there's a lot of attitudes that are so while there's support for rail, I also think, though, we shouldn't take it for granted. And so I think we need to go after the best and most likely opportunities to bear fruit. There are so many opportunities, but I'm proud of what this team did here in Fort Worth before me. Connecting that airport was brilliant. It's second busiest in the world and growing. 7 runways, simultaneous takeoffs and landings. It's amazing. Just it's a sight to be seen. And so I think that was a brilliant move to demonstrate the value and effectiveness of transit, of rail.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for bringing up the build grant and ClearPath and the double tracking projects. I think those of us at the COG, of course, are very excited about that, and I think it's a big win for the region. But I want to ask, because you kind of alluded to it in your presentation, about the, your thoughts on the membership only or the member, kind of pay-to-play system we currently have. And I think it's a unique thing about our region. I think those of us, perhaps some of us outside of the state of Texas or not from this region, might not be quite as familiar with how that works. But I wanted to ask, do you think that has any unique challenges and opportunities that you could speak to, as well as are there any implications perhaps for other metropolitan areas in the United States or in North America that might consider that type of operation?
That's a fantastic question. I don't know, do we have any elected officials in the room? The half penny goes back quite some time in Tarrant County or at Fort Worth. I think that a couple things, like for context, I think many of you know, but the state of Texas does not fund rail and public transportation, at least not the regional authorities that run public transportation. So all of the revenues generated locally. Couple observations with that. One, I think it's worked fairly well to this point in that we've been able to leverage enormous sums of federal dollars thanks to those local dollars. And it's a fairly reliable revenue source for us. It's been reliable because in North Texas, we've had growth. So growth has generated revenue, which has allowed us to continue to invest. But I don't think the half penny is kept up with the scope of what needs to be done here, arguably. I think for the 4th largest metro in the United States, traffic congestion is going to be difficult to keep at bay. And so we need new and innovative ways to fund rail and transit. And I think there are lots of ways to do it. We have tens of millions of visitors that come here, and we think nothing of it collectively, right? We see our hotel bills, we see our rental car bills, and the price you pay is only half of what you really pay because you're paying all these additional surcharges. And no one thinks twice of it, right? As a visitor, you just pay it and you move on. So looking at visitor revenue is one opportunity. Austin just went through an experiment with their voters, and the voters approved a property tax increase. Property taxes are expensive. They're already expensive, and I'm not sure there's an appetite for that. So, but here's the thing. Other parts of the country have figured it out, and they're leveraging substantial federal dollars to improve their region and improve mobility. So I think the argument here is, do we want to live with congestion? If we're going to have growth and growth is coming, do we want to tolerate the issues that brings, or do we want to think ahead and get ready for it and do it in a thoughtful way? And then hopefully we're not paying for it ourselves, right? Our visitors and our federal government we're sending our tax dollars to Washington. I think we ought to bring them back here to North Texas. So that's sort of the view that we're coalescing around now. We have to do more with the local dollars, but we're going to need other revenue sources to really, scale up the program.
I have a question
For
here.
one more question.
I have a question here. You mentioned, I'm over here,
No.
TOD around the stations, and right now I live on the Dallas side. I'm from Hearst actually, but as I ride around the commuter rails, I've noticed that most of the stations are just empty now, And so DART has begun to start working with the cities to maybe even get rid or develop their parking lots to make them places where people actually want to go. It's Trinity Metro going to do the same.
Yeah, thank you for that softball, and here's why. TexRail we were able to deliver TexRail because of three key partners: City of Fort Worth, City of North Richland Hills, and City of Grapevine. TexRail would not exist without those strong city leaders getting behind the project early. Grapevine was out in front along, I think, 15 years ahead of the actual building of TexRail. And they started dedicating their sales tax revenue to fund TexRail. I think if you look at the plans in these communities around our TexRail stations, if any of you have not been to Grapevine, get over to Grapevine. If you have time, take a look at what Grapevine has done. It is extraordinary. Mayor Tate there and his team had an incredible vision for what could be done. Same is going on in North Richland Hills, Mayor Trevino. Remarkable vision. A new main, not just in name, right? Sometimes we see developments and they're branded Main Street. This is a real true Main Street that's emerging around the train stations with high density development, walkable, mixed use. So I think you come back in a few years and take a look at what's happened on TexRail. I think we're going to be out talking about that locally and nationally. I think we're really proud of what's going on here. I think there's more to be done, certainly, but we're off to a good start. So thank you for making the time. Really a pleasure to talk with you all.